Thanks, folks, for joining us for this overview and demonstration of the HPC-ED project. Um, I'm Rich Knepper, and I'm one of the PIs of the project. HPC-ED is a federated repository to help provide access to training materials more broadly, help people find them and share them. I think pretty much everyone already knows that since they accepted our invitation to join us, but I'll provide a quick overview of what you're going to be seeing this afternoon. We'll have an introduction to the project that talks about some of our goals and what we've been able to accomplish so far, a little bit about what it takes to get started using the repository and how to get rolling with that, what you need to have in order to use it. We'll have a walkthrough of how it's going to work for you as a training material provider. We have 2 case studies that cover activities that are already using it and pushing materials into the repository. Then we'll come back for a Q&A and get a little bit of your feedback. So I can hand it off to Kate at this point.
All right. Thanks, Rich. Hey, everybody. So I just wanted to do a quick overview of the project. We right now have a 1-year pilot project through the cyber training program at NSF. So really, we're just trying to develop as much as possible to get to a sort of sustainable point that we can share these tools and start, building the catalog in the community. So overall, our project goals include, making training and education materials for HPC more findable. So we know that these materials are out there, and you are developing them, and we want to make sure that everybody can get to them when they need them. And so we're creating this federated catalog so that materials can be added and discovered. And then we want to grow this community to facilitate the improvement of these tools and greater adoption of them and feedback. And so you probably know we have a project site that's a GitHub site, so that's available for general project information and updates. And then our main documentation pages I have listed here, but you'll see them throughout this presentation, and you should have gotten a link to them in the invite email as well. And so if you see on the right, this is sort of the overview of how the catalog is intended to work. So those sites that have materials that want to publish to the catalog can do that through metadata sharing. So you can have metadata that describes your materials and then publish that to the catalog so that it then can be searched and shared with your communities through a discovery portal that you can have in your for your institutions, so that educators and students and researchers can access those materials. And so today we're going to go over how you can get started using the catalog. And Susan, do you want to take over sharing here?
No, I'll wait a little bit. Thank you. Hi, I'm Susan Meringer, and I just want to quickly cover what you might want to do before you really dig in and get started. What plans do you need to have in place? What do you need to get and know? So as Kate described, this is a federated catalog, and for a catalog to achieve its best use, you need to both put things into the catalog, and you or others also need to take things out of the catalog. A library doesn't work if people only put books in. But which role or roles are you planning to do? Are you planning to be someone that adds resources to the catalog or discovers resources? And how you do things also will change depending on whether you're talking about 1 or 2 resources or whether you're talking about tens or hundreds of resources. So in this list of prerequisites, I'm not going to tell you how to go about that. That's JP's job later. But that this is a good thing to figure out before you start walking through the steps so that you can follow the right path. He's going to be telling you you can do it this way or that way. And so make your plan first, make your decisions first. The other thing you should think about beforehand is your metadata. Everything that you put in needs to have metadata descriptions, and everything, whenever you're searching, you're using the metadata that others use to describe their materials to discover the things that you're really looking for. And so understanding what the possible fields are and what they mean is important to understand before you start. We're going to take a look at the documentation. And so that's something that I definitely suggest doing before you start. And it's important to know that there are some software prerequisites. JP will cover next that this is built on Globus server. So installing the Globus command line interface and possibly the Python SDK will be some software that you need to take care of too. And I just want to say, I didn't already have Globus CLI installed, and it was not a problem to either install or use. So if you haven't either, don't worry about it. There are also some boxes. The sharing box, if you're going to share materials, it would be a good idea to take a good solid look at the input file that you'll use, the JSON file, and you'll need to get a provider ID. Everybody has a unique ID, which shows the catalog who owns it. You will need to request that provider ID, and that will actually come from JP as well. You can send us mail or contact him on the Slack channel. We'll give you that address later. If you're searching or discovering materials, I'll give you a quick look at the developers portal, and again, go through the documentation and look through the search options. So I've been referring to this JSON file that is used when you want to share one of your resources. You would use a JSON file that looks like this to submit one resource. You can use a longer multi-file JSON to do many, but it will basically repeat the content section of this. So what I want to point out very briefly is use the mailing a letter analogy. The text that is highlighted in gold is showing what's on the outside of the envelope. Where is this information going? Who is it coming from? And the information that the text is in white, that is describing the contents of the letter, or basically the metadata of the resource itself that you're sharing. So let's take a very quick look at the different things that I pointed out in those two slides, and I'd like to take over now. So we keep referring to this as a developer portal. This is not meant to be a public portal for people to really search for the materials. This is a developer portal for all of us who are going to be using these tools to share and discover materials, to be able to check what's in there. And you know, you want to be able to be sure that you're inputting your materials correctly. And if you, Jamie, I believe, has been sharing links like crazy. He probably shared this one. I absolutely recommend trying this out to give an idea of what that metadata looks like from the other side. And it's a great way to check that you're putting in your materials correctly. And another site that I pointed out was the wiki. I believe that's already in the chat as well. The wiki documents have 4 sections. This home section gives an overview of what you can do. This is basically what Kate presented in a version that you can go back to and look at. There is also the metadata description. No matter whether you're sharing or discovering, you really need to understand what the metadata fields are. There is publishing section, which if you're going to share your materials, this is where all the good stuff is, explaining how that part works. And searching, JP will be also covering searching in more detail, but this is it. This is the entire documentation, the 4 sections. When you are publishing, and again, we are in the publishing section of the wiki documents, I want to point out that there are 2 example links here. One is to publish a single entry and one is to publish multiple documents. If you take a look at the single entry, you'll see almost exactly like that example that I showed on the last slide of the JSON file. The thing that I think can be very helpful is to walk through these fields side by side with the metadata description, because then you'll find the field name and you'll find the format and an example of what goes in that field. So in some cases, what goes in that field is very tightly described, and sometimes it's just free text. So, and it also may be helpful to see what's required by Globus, what's required by our project, what's optional, and what does it really mean when you say expertise level. And we'll tell you when it's free text or when it's an example, and examples of putting in just one element to a field and multiple elements to a field. So that would be my suggestion for prerequisites of before you start. If you understand those pieces and you know where that information is, it's not a long process. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm going to be elaborating a little bit more on how developers can do sharing and discovery of HPC-ED training metadata, as Susan already introduced. So the first part I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the architecture of the metadata catalog. We've built our metadata catalog using the Globus search service. Invite you to follow that link in the presentation if you want to learn about all of the other services. Oops. All of the other services that are part of the Globus platform. You may be familiar with others, and especially the data transfer service that's very popular. But another one of their services is the Globus search service. It is hosted on Amazon Web Services, so it is highly scalable, highly reliable, and it is free to all Globus subscribers. So we're going to cover 2 parts in this developer deeper dive. First of all, how do you publish metadata, including some of the prerequisites that Susan mentioned, the formats for publishing metadata, methods, tools. How do you check that your publishing actually worked using a couple of methods, both the command line interface and this search pilot developer site. So digging into this, as a reminder, like Susan mentioned, there are prerequisites, and essentially 2 in order to publish. First, you need to have a provider ID. That is the ID for your institution that represents who owns the records that got published when you do the publishing. So you need to ask for that provider ID using that email that you see here in the instructions. What you do is you send us an email and you say, I work for XYZ University or Computational Institute, and I'm going to be publishing for our institution metadata about training material. And just with the institutional name, we will assign you a provider ID. And we will also send you the equivalent of a user ID/password, the credentials that your software can use in order to publish your metadata. those credentials that we will give you, that password, you can share with the other developers in your institution. So for the alpha phase here, we're just giving each institution one password that they can use for all their developers. That will change in the future. So formats, like Susan mentioned, there is a Globus search defined JSON document format. And that Globus defined document is JSON, and think of it as an envelope with some Globus fields, and then inside of it, all of the metadata that we need for your HPC training material. So that little document right here is an example of what that looks like. There's a bunch of Globus field, and there's this JSON element called content, and inside of that is all of the HPC-ED metadata that we want to publish.
Excuse me, JP.
Yes.
We actually have a question from chat. Tilden's actually asking, is a Globus license a prerequisite?
It is not a prerequisite for you. We, as a project, have the license, and so we're the ones that built the index. And so we own the index. It is under our license, and you do not need to worry about it. However, if you are a Globus subscriber, you could create your own indexes for your own metadata if you want. And you may not have known that you could do that, but that's what we did. We used one of our Globus licenses for this. And again, a publisher does not have to have the license. It's the person who creates the index. In this case, our project created the index. Very good question, in fact. So the document format, there's two basic formats. Basically, depending on whether you are publishing a single entry or if you're publishing a collection of entries. And you can follow the Globus documentation link there to see that. Essentially, in the Globus fields, if you say gmeta entry, you're publishing one entry. If you say gmeta list, you're publishing a list of entries that all appear in the rest of the document. So how does Globus know when you are publishing metadata, whether you are adding or updating an entry? And the answer is that one of those Globus fields is called subject. And that subject field is the unique ID for the training metadata that you are publishing. So it is not the same thing as the subject of the training material. So if you look in our metadata definition, it will make that a bit clearer. But this is a Globus field called subject, and every entry you publish has to have a unique entry for that. If you're publishing a subject that has not been published before, you're adding an entry. If you publish a subject that has been added before, you are updating it. And that's it. Pretty simple. The tools and methods used for publishing, there are essentially two, as you can see in this diagram. First of all, if you create a JSON document that already is in Globus search metadata format, and the HPC-ED metadata is inside of it, you can just use the Globus command line interface tool. And that has commands where you say Globus search ingest, and you give it your JSON file, and it goes off and it publishes all of the entries in that file. The second method is if you have metadata in any other format in the world that you want or have to deal with, you can write your own Python program. Okay, and you write your Python program to read your input data or parse it off of web pages or whatever you need to do. Read that input data, then you convert it into a JSON object that matches what we need in the HPC-ED catalog, and then you use the Globus Python SDK to publish that metadata into the HPC-ED federated catalog. Okay. So here you can see command line, how you can install the Globus CLI in the setup section, how you can configure your client with your ID and password, and then how you can go off and do Globus search commands to search what indexes are out there, to start a Globus search ingest, which is the command line way of publishing, how you can search that what you published is there, or how you can delete a single entry that you just published and don't want to have published anymore. And then, like I mentioned, or like we haven't mentioned yet, when you do a globalist publish using the command line interface, it actually creates a background task to process the data that you've told it to publish. And in response, it gives you the task ID of that publishing process. So you can go and ask it, I just published, I got this task ID. What is the status of that task ID? And it'll tell you if it completed successfully and published everything or not. Okay. So that's when you're using the command line interface. And if you're using the Python SDK, again, you will get back a task ID, and you can use the SDK to query if you want to. So stepping back, next we're gonna, actually, sorry, I wanted to mention a couple of things. Besides using the Globus search task command to see the status of your publishing, we also have, like Susan mentioned, this search pilot.operations.accessci.org portal. This is a portal designed for developers, where developers are either people who are writing the software or running the commands to publish your metadata, or it could be web developers who are building the search interfaces for discovering the training. So either of those developers might be interested in being able to go look in the index to see what's there in the HPC-ED metadata index. And so we've given you this search pilot.operations.accessci.org website. You can see what it looks like. When you get to it, it'll look like this. You pick the first catalog on the top, and essentially you're looking at the 8,251 entries that we have published in our developer index. And you can see how you can filter down on various facets to narrow down what the data that you are looking at is, including the all-important one at the bottom, which is what is the provider that published different entries. So for example, I can see here all of the entries that Keen has published. Okay. So that's how you can check that what you've published is there if you just want to use a web browser. Next, we're going to cover a little bit about how you do metadata searching, including using the command line interface, which you can search with, the Python library. There's also the Globus SDK for JavaScript for building web applications, so embedding search into your websites. Or you can just simply embed someone else's JavaScript web app, which members of the community are starting to build. So there are essentially all of these methods and tools and methods for searching metadata. If you want to get metadata in the Globus search format and no changes to it, then you can use the command line interface, and it will give you Globus search metadata. If you want to put that data from the federated catalog into any other format that you would like, you can use a Python program that you write. You make calls to the Globus Python SDK to do searches. It will give you JSON back, and you can transform that JSON however you would like into any other format you would like. Okay. If you are building a website, again, you can use the Globus SDK for JavaScript to write search interface inside your website, or you can borrow someone else's web app and embed it into your website. In all of these cases, you can see that the CLI actually uses the SDK, which is the same thing your Python program uses. The Globus SDK makes network calls. That's what this dotted line means. Makes network calls to the Globus API out on the cloud. And that Globus API publishes or searches the Globus search index that we've created for HPC-ED metadata. Okay. So there's examples here on how to install the CLI to do searching, and some of the results that you get when you do searching, how you would do searches using the Globus Python SDK. And there's examples in our GitHub also that you can check out and see how that works, including all of the code. And if you wanted to, you can even do curl and wgets against the Globus API directly yourself. So there's the CLI, the SDK, curls, and then JavaScript, 4 different methods for making searches against Globus. And that's the end of the developer-facing presentation.
So I'll kind of just give a little bit of a case study on my approach to doing this. When we first started looking at this, I thought about the Journal of Computational Science Education. What could we do to take the different journal articles published in that and get them into this repository? In an ideal world, the stuff you're sharing will already be in a database, and the fields will match perfectly with the Globus toolkit expectations. This was a pretty close to good scenario, but it wasn't perfect. So as instead of building from a database already, we were doing screen scraping from a Jekyll site. So in terms of our structure of our Jekyll site, essentially we have a collections folder, lots of articles with every volume, with every issue, with a page describing every article in it. So while we didn't have everything databased, we did have a uniform structure for everything. And in terms of what they look like, it was fairly consistent. The formatting was, I'll describe it as almost YAML. The header sections in a Jekyll page are supposed to be YAML, but what I found when we started looking through each of our things was standards had not necessarily been held to, and it didn't break the website, so no one really changed it. But that meant some of the ways that I was going to parse it required a little more work. But on the upside, again, we had a way of looking at every single article in the journal, where we had our own internal storage in a consistent manner of how we described our own metadata. So we already had metadata to work with, and we had it in a way that we could automate looking through it. What we needed to get our headers from our Jekyll pages into was a single JSON file. We were using the gmeta list approach of being able to do multiple entries. And the differences we were finding is some of the things, the differences were not big. Abstract with a lowercase a compared to abstract with a capital A, author's list. But then we have other items where we didn't have the metadata stored in the journal that Globus needed, so we needed to be able to decide on that on the fly and make decisions on that. And other things where the titles for things were slightly different, we did translate for that. Process-wise, for that, very similar to what JP was talking about, wrote a Python script to go through and do it. We did not use the Python SDK. We just simply wrote to a JSON file and then used the JSON file using the command line tools to upload it. I won't bore you with all the details of every aspect of the Python code, but in general, we use the OS path option in Python to get a list of everything we wanted to process. Wrote a routine internally to go through and handle the parsing of the not quite YAML header files in all of our Jekyll files. Pulled that out, stored them as variables, accounted for things where formats were slightly different, and managed to make sure dates were in the correct format. And then finally, a key thing for all of this, making sure that we had our subject field, that we could have the subject in the right format in a way that we had a unique entry for every article, but still starting with our Globus provider ID. And, fairly straightforward, create a dictionary object, use the dictionary objects to populate a larger dictionary object for the gmeta list, and use a JSON dump from the JSON library to write it to a JSON file. Then once we had that, just simply uploaded it using the command line tools.
All right. So in my case, my name's Jamie Powell, and I actually work at TAC, and of course I'm part of the group. And my experience is actually an example of what happens when you allow your brain to wander. Wherein Dave actually had a very nicely put together YAML site where he actually pulled headers and things from. I actually had a more dispersed set of training objects that I was going to include. And so I looked at it in terms of what if someone needed to add an individual entry into the database, and maybe they didn't have as much technical chops as far as in programming and things like that, and we're leaning more towards a GUI. So the way that I actually did it is I looked at it in terms of if I wanted to have some type of Google form where we could add our entries information, that form could then dump into a Google spreadsheet. How could I get the JSON out? In my mind, I thought it would be really simple. I could go to a JSON exporter and boom, bam, I'd be good to go. Not true. So what I actually ended up doing was generating some code in the app script inside of Google Sheets and made an extension so that I could then export out the JSON in the proper format. And then I went for it the way David actually did, wherein I had a JSON file and I could use the Globus CLI. The gist information is there, as well as the original article where I kind of went through and modified some code. I do, however, want to point to some tips that you may want to be aware of. Just to restate something that both JP and Susan said, you do need to make sure you get the correct provider ID, as well as, like David said, ensure that you have the proper capitalization for those different descriptors as you're putting those in. One thing that I found out is we cannot update those entries once they are inside of the database. That is something that the JP can actually turn on, but right now with us in the developer stage, we don't. And just to make sure here, JP, can we delete as well, or is that still turned off? I know the information's there.
Yeah, adding, updating, and deleting individual entries is all permitted.
Oh, okay, everything's on now.
Yeah. The only thing that doesn't work is doing bulk deletes.
Understood. So when we were actually doing our pre-alpha, well, let's call it pre-1 testing, that wasn't available. But I would say it seems office, but make sure you enter your data accurately. Double check it if you're doing it individually. It's really easy to have a flub of a finger, like you all saw in chat with email. So make sure that's good to go. GUIs are great for a limited number of entries. So if you're doing 1Z, 2Z, great. If you're doing bulk, go with the coding. Make your life easier if possible. Now, of course, one more time, make sure that the Google Sheet headings match the JSON object key item names and capitalization so that your JSON object comes out correct. Beyond that, all the information is there listed on the site and inside of the slide deck, which is inside the chat. So I would say that, does anyone have any questions or concerns? Did mine a wee bit different. Side note, Google Sheets extensions are written in JavaScript. So for my fellow squirrels out there, enjoy. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mary.
Thanks, Jamie. I love doing scripting on Google spreadsheets. I do a lot of mass emails with that. So I'm Mary Thomas with the San Diego Supercomputing Center. And what we've got, if you look in that upper right, there's that SDSC, a couple of images that if you zoom in, you'll be able to make some sense of them. But we have a large catalog, a training catalog with our interactive videos. We have hundreds of hours and over 80 single events, and some of them are multi-day, multi-hour events. So at first cut, we're hosting our site on an Apache web server living on just a Unix OS VM. And we've been doing it that way for several years. I was a little concerned that taking our site and adding in this material might be complicated, but it turned out not to be, because we already host our site with JSON formatted training events, but of course it's different metadata. So we had to write a script. The yellow box represents our original input metadata, and in JSON format, we had to convert that. So the blue box is our converted, and that's the actual HPC-ED JSON formatted data. And that took a little bit of time, but I have a smart undergraduate who did it in a day or two. And so we've got that. We had some issues with, material that wasn't clean for just a few, but we got that all ironed out. We have a cron job now every night, updates our JSON files. And then at the end of the day, we were able to ingest with a batch script, 80 training events. Excuse me, that's my cat. She says hello. Can't have a Zoom meeting without a cat. Anyway, it shows up there. We do have a demo test page, but I forgot to include a picture. The nice thing is that the template page up in the upper SCSC black header box, that same site works with these JSON data files. We bring them back and we're adapting our site to host the new metadata formatted JSON files. So really the things that you saw, a lot of stuff went right. It was a little tricky setting up that script, but like I said, we figured it out. The things that went wrong are materials on a web hosting system, so we had to get permissions to do things like run cron jobs. Not everybody hosting a website is the sysadmin for that website with root, and that's our case. We're on a big system that hosts a lot of different sites for the center. So we had to get some permission things to set up correctly. Setting up the Globus environment on the web server system was really complicated. It's easy to do it on your laptop, but my data is not on my laptop. I need to work on my web hosting machine. So it's a little bit different approach. And those are things you solve it once, they don't occur again. You just have to work with the people who are administering the web page. Determining search criteria is a bit of a challenge, and what I mean by that is there's 8,000 events. Don't try to download all 8,000. That's one of my last tips is my student tried to. It's a lot of space and took a long time. So you have to figure out what you want to search for, what dates, and make sure you've, as Susan has said in the prereqs, you've planned for that. And then debugging typos in your JSON file caused some weird errors, but if you get like, the hello world example for a JSON file that actually works, you can always test that one that you know works all the time, and then you can pretty much assume you have to clean up your JSON file. So testing local, like I said, is easy. What other tips? Be prepared for those challenges when you're on a large system. One of the things we're still trying to solve is our version of Python that is default on the web hosting system is different from what we want to use, and some other custom environment variables we needed. So we're having to build a Python environment. So that got a little tricky, and so we learned about that. And with that, it's once you follow the instructions on the HPC-ED wiki, they're very clear. And once you do that, it's pretty straightforward. And thank you. My cat is pulling my shoulder. I'm sorry about that. Okay, that's it. So next we can go to whoever's after me. Susan.
So my story is similar to everyone else's and also a little bit different. So I'll try to stick to the streamlined version. So my plan, at least initially, was to try to share about 40 online tutorials into the federated catalog. What I did first is I uploaded just one. That gave, and I did it by hand. I studied the metadata doc and the example, and I made a lot of decisions about which fields in the JSON file would be different for each tutorial I uploaded, and which ones would always be the same. So for example, my provider ID would always be the same. My cost for sessions would always be null. My expiration date would always be never expires or something like that. And so I was able to understand which of the fields I could have the same for everything I uploaded versus which ones I would want to programmatically pull over from when I did it programmatically. Let's answer Tim's question right now. is the limited tags documented along with what attributes are allowed? That metadata portion of the document shows you what's required by Globus, and then what's recommended. You could put in a whole lot of nulls if you want to for the content tags. And actually, I put in some nulls for the content tags that I'm planning to update later. I just don't have all of the information quite yet. JP, would you answer that differently? Oh, the HTML tags in the abstract. Jamie, you want to take that one?
So we found this out by mistake, to be honest. Um, I know for a fact that the anchor tags, the ahrefs work. The image tags, I see them attempting to render, but the person that actually added that particular entry has a bad link back to the image. So having said that, I would also assume some of the header tag. Actually, I know for a fact some of the header tags and paragraph tags work as well. Now, as far as in a full extensive list of what works, not quite yet, but play around and definitely give it a shot. JP, did you have a better description?
No, I was just going to say that it was an intentional design on our part to allow HTML in the abstract. And that allows people to have more beautifully rendered abstracts with links and stuff like that. But we did not take responsibility for hosting the images or anything else like that. So it is your responsibility to host images somewhere else, and we will point to them if you publish them.
Great. So thank you. Once I had one and I thought I knew what I was doing, then I wanted to deal with the rest programmatically. So each of my tutorials has a local JSON file with most of the information that I needed to fill in the tags that would be different from tutorial to tutorial. And so that allowed me to write a program, not the same kind of program, but a similar kind of program to the other ones you heard about, to build one big file that would write a lot at the same time. So what went wrong? As careful as I was with my JSON files, I thought they were clean, but there were still some local metadata that needed to be augmented and some that needed to be cleaned up. So the dates, published dates, weren't all in exactly the same format like I thought they were, for example. The other thing that tripped me up, the first time I put one in and it just failed. Well, why did it fail? The abstract that I pulled in had double quotations in it. And so I was essentially ending the string earlier than I intended to end the string. So I had to replace all my quotes. And my third, what went wrong, is that as careful as I was with my personal provider ID, I still put that in the wrong format. And since I had a legal one, but not mine, it worked, but it didn't work the way I wanted it to. So that one was user error. Tips, skip the first one, I mentioned it. The second, you might want to test your JSON file for syntax errors. Just looking through a JSON file to find the syntax error is not fun. I used simple lint program, and that worked right away. Test one before you do many. Oh, the third bullet from last. If you are submitting this file or running this file with the Globus command line interface, what I like to do is after I run the command that does the ingestion, it gives you a task ID. Right after that, you can issue that command shown in yellow, Globus search task show task ID, and it will let you know if your command succeeded or any other information about it. And then after you upload, it's great to go to that developers portal and see if it looks like you were expecting it to. The last thing I'd say is put a procedure in place that's easy to replicate, because if you do anything wrong, like I did with a provider ID, or you want to reflect updated dates on your materials or tags that additional tags you're adding, you want to be able to recreate your input files and upload them again very easily. Thank you.
I do want to put out there one more time. I know for me, there was a bit of a mental hoop I had to jump through to understand for myself that this is a metadata catalog. Your actual items, training items and whatnot will not be transferred to the site. It's just a link to the site so that they can actually, so that different training objects can be found. So if you move them on your local site, then of course you need to ensure that they're updated in the catalog, and that's something that we are working on. And also, if you haven't joined the Slack, I have added a link.
I want to thank you for being part of this. This is alpha testing. We do hope and expect to find ways to make this process easier. A couple of them were mentioned. So starting early at this stage, we are happy that you're here. We hope you'll ask us questions and not get stuck. And please do be in touch.
Yeah, so we do have further office hours on April 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so you could join us again for Q&A after you've tried things and have gotten maybe some problems or maybe some innovations that you wanted to share with us. Jamie had just shared the Slack channel. Feel free to join that. You can check in with us and get answers and questions there. There's the email address to get in touch with us. And we'd really love to see your feedback on the interest survey. So if you'd be willing to put in information into the interest survey as we go forward to help guide our efforts. This is a pilot, and when we can show that we've responded to folks who have engaged with this and have feedback for us, I think it'll really be strong for continuing this work. And we'd love to see this develop further and be of service to more people.